Nah, cut this. Give it back. Give it back. Myself. Welcome back to the channel. For anyone who has missed me while I have kind of been away, I obviously threw up a review quite recently on a 720S Spider, but I feel like I haven't checked in nor updated nor like partook in the relationship really being a YouTuber. It's been a long time, obviously, on this automotive channel. I've really just been in reviews when I can, which I really enjoy. Probably my favorite content to film. I just washed this car for the first time ever, and I hadn't even made a single video with this car, and I figured it was time. For those who've been on this channel for a while, you guys know all of the cars I've owned. This channel technically started when I bought my 2012 R8, my gated manual first gen R8. But when I bought that car, I had already owned what I believe to be a sports car. I owned a Mark 7 Golf R in Tornado Red. It was DSG. By the time I bought the R8, I think I had already built it. It had been running some sort of stage 2 setup at the time, I'm guessing. And so technically I started this channel with a Mark 7 Golf R. Some of my earliest videos on this channel are with a Mark 7 Golf R, and fast forward to 2023, damn, I don't know, 3 years later? God, I didn't want to think about it. I am back in a Mark 7 Golf R, and so we're gonna get into that today, and I'm gonna explain how the that happened. But over the course of this channel, I've owned a lot of cars, and I've always made it very clear that I was never in a position where I was ever wealthy or had the money to go throw out on all these cars and lease a Huracan. I was really intelligent about what cars I purchased. I always made money on my cars, and I used them as a dual investment to serve as content. Obviously, you get the people commenting that it's daddy's money, blah, blah, blah. And I just think it's ironic that, like, by no means am I ever flaunting these cars. If people knew the lengths I had gone to actually purchase these cars and to fork out that large percentage of the capital that I had to my name, you probably wouldn't be commenting that. Now, I want to go through all the cars I've owned and explain how I ended up in another Mark 7 Golf R. I launched this channel with my 2012, right around the time when I bought my 2012 R8. It was a manual right before the facelift of the first gen, so right before they introduced S-Tronic and did like the headlight, taillight update and some interior stuff, whatever. At the time, it was so exciting. I loved that car to death, and that was essentially my first supercar. Obviously, it was a V8 R8. It was a sports car, but obviously it had that exotic presence, that supercar presence. In its day and age, it was a supercar. And to me, R8s still, for some reason, are like one of the flagship cars for me. Like, if I see an old gen R8, a first gen R8, I get stoked. And I'm pretty numb to cars as of late. I only owned that car for literally 2 months. What felt like a long time. We did a FI exhaust on it, and I literally sold it before I even had to register it. Before the registration that was on the car expired, which I don't really remember the specifics, but it was something along those lines. I then was put in a position where I ended up buying an NC1 ACURA NSX, the new generation NSX, a car I literally never thought I would buy, and looking back on it was probably my favorite car I've ever owned. It was the most surreal. It was a proper purebred supercar, exotic car. It got looks everywhere. People didn't know what it was. It was the whole package, right? It gave me the experience, the sound, but it was also a comfortable and very usable car. We did downpipes on that car, which is pretty much the only thing you need to do on an NSX. We went catless, and it sounded incredible. And we made a ton of really cool content with that car. Then shortly after, I sold the Mark 7 Golf R, and I ended up buying an M2. I bought the N55, so the first generation M2 before the comp came out. Well, the car I bought was before the comp came out. It was a Black Shadow edition. The comps had been out at the time. I was currently in that moment in a position with $200,000 worth of vehicles in my garage. And if you took sticker prices, far more than that. I ended up getting a really good deal on the NSX at literally the time when the market was at its floor. Everyone thought I was crazy. Everyone hates on that car because they've never driven it. But I bought that car for $110,000, which was mind-blowing at the time for a car with a nearly $200,000 sticker. And then I ended up buying the M2, and I had a BMW M2 and an Acura NSX in my garage at one time, which was like, I feel like this was like the pinnacle for me of like really just in awe. And ironically, I owned the NSX through COVID, where we actually quarantined when everything kind of blew up, and I was literally by myself for a couple months. That was the car I drove every day. Like, that was my fun in the day, was I'd wake up, I'd get my NSX, I'd go get coffee, and I'd go drive around and look at houses or some shit. I don't know. And it got to a point where I actually got bored of the car. So this is like peak garage goals for me, like all my dreams coming into fruition, but also peak numbness of cars, where I'm driving around. At one point seemed to be an unfathomable car to own every day, and I'm bored of it. So at that point I was like, I need to get out of this and I need to get into a proper driver's car. I was just kind of paddling around everywhere and it was just getting boring. And so over COVID, I had been in the market. I had my NSX for sale. I knew it would sell pretty quickly because, again, I bought it so cheap that I didn't even need to list it that high to make money on it. I ended up looking around at the 981 GT4 market, and that is when I ended up buying my Carmine Red GT4, which, again, I can't really compare my cars. I like to say the NSX was my favorite car, but in reality, who knows? So for a little while, I owned my M2 and a 981 Cayman GT4. That was a great car. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I'm a big driver's car fan. I'm a huge Porsche fanboy, and so that, to me, at the time, did feel like the pinnacle of car. And it definitely was the most driver-oriented car I've ever owned. It was manual. It made my M2 more fun because my M2 was DCT. And so at this time was also a really good garage setup. And then after, I ended up selling my M2. What the f did I buy after the M2? I guess I just sold my M2. I think I decided I was moving to Arizona, where I currently live now in Scottsdale, and I just sold my BMW M2. I forgot that I didn't own my GT4 with anything else. When I was gonna be here, I didn't want to transport an extra car here. I didn't have anyone who could take it. And so at that point, it just made sense just to sell the car because I really didn't need two when I was out here anyway. I don't even know why I had two to begin with. And so I moved out here with the GT4. We ended up doing like the loudest exhaust system on a GT4 ever. I know some of you guys would think, like, I know everyone says that, but like, you can go watch the video. It's fucked. We did like a full race Dundon setup, Dundon header setup, and then we did a full custom titanium exhaust with advanced innovation, and it was actually literally like a cup car for the street. I had that car for a couple months here, and the market ended up being really high. Like I had said, I had been taking all that capital, the other capital I had in my life, that was just slowly dwindling down, reinvesting into the YouTube channel, all these things. And for a couple years, I'd just been struggling of making this YouTube career profitable like it was a couple years back, which again is just kind of the waves of YouTube and me just trying to find my way to find what content I enjoy doing. Driven by Jordan has always just been the passion project, the side channel. Like, for those of you who don't know, I do come from traditional YouTube. I just didn't want to put automotive stuff on my main channel, and so Driven by Jordan was kind of like that fun thing for me to do that never really became work, and I'm very grateful for that. But in my traditional space of YouTube, I do reinvest a lot of money back into the videos, and I was taking a large sum of that capital and had it tied away into the cars that I was investing for. It's a long story, but my point being is after I sold the GT4, I wasn't going to go buy another expensive car. I was looking at buying an E63S wagon for a little bit because I wanted a car to go road trip around in, but the market, right as I ended up selling my GT4, the market on that increased by like 20%. I think Mercedes had announced that it was either the last AMG wagon they were going to create or maybe the last non-hybrid wagon. I don't know what it was, but the prices on those are still through the roof. And so I ended up going a little cheaper and buying an Audi RS3. The intent with the RS3 was to have a car to go on road trips, and that's exactly what we did. That was the car that we took up the coast of California. That was the car that we took to Salt Lake. Now keep in mind, when I bought that car, it was like the first car I'd bought pre-built. It was running like a full Stage 2 Plus system that could run ethanol. That was by far the fastest car I've ever owned. When that car was on ethanol, it would walk NAV10s on the road. I'd beat stock R8, stock Huracans. It was mentally fast, and it served its purpose. It was a perfect car. It wasn't that expensive, and I know expensive is relative to the other cars I'd owned, because for me now, that would probably still be expensive. And so I had that car for a long time, and I got to a point where I was just kind of falling out of love with cars, or at least I was just becoming very numb to cars. I wasn't making as much automotive content, and that car payment was like $800 a month, and I was like, why am I paying for this? I don't need this right now. And that's when I decided not this, but to just buy something mellow, like something that's just a car that I could use, that was comfortable, it could get me to California and back, me and my puppy at the time, who I don't have anymore, which is a really long story for the main channel. That's where this came along. I ended up selling my RS3, which took probably longer than any other car to sell. Obviously, I knew when I bought it, buying a fully built car, that was going to be the predicament that I dealt with when I had sold it. Took a lot of months to sell. During that time is when my business struggled the most. My business meaning my main channel and my social media, and I was taking time off trying to figure out what I was. I'm one of those people where I do value my happiness and my direction more than money. So I've always been willing to sacrifice my money and put my money behind my heart, essentially. That sounds kind of weird. And create the content I want to make, even if it's going to lose me money or cost me money. That's just how I am as like an artist, right? Around this time was when money had been depleting a lot. And the reason I say this is to explain, like I said, the reason of how I went from owning all these cars to driving around in another Mark 7 Golf R. How you doing? When I finally had sold my RS3 and started shopping for a car, I really didn't know what I wanted to get. I literally didn't want to spend more than $20,000 on a car. I didn't want an expensive car payment. I didn't want expenses to worry about. I am notorious for having high expenses, and I do believe in the fact, and I do struggle with this belief, that like I should upgrade my finances and not downgrade my lifestyle. But at the same time, I do enjoy the perspective change of practicing frugality and learning how to budget your money. And it kind of goes against everything I believe in, but at the same time, that was where I was at. I don't know how, but one day, someone sent it to me, I think. I came across this blue Mark 7 Golf R manual. My first Golf R was DSG. I didn't even really want a manual car. That was at North Scottsdale Volkswagen. And I never buy dealer cars because they're always expensive. The only dealer car I ever bought was my BMW M2 because the dealer clearly didn't understand it was a Black Shadow edition, so they didn't have it priced accordingly. I ended up buying that car far cheaper anyway through a dealer. And I do enjoy dealer financing and stuff like that, just makes the process smoother. Now this car, again, didn't really make sense. It had a lot of miles, but that's kind of what I've been looking for. The only downside of this car was it had 100,000 miles when I bought it. It has quite a bit of rock chips all over like the front clip. Obviously it has 100,000 miles. It was clearly used to commute, and they didn't clear bra the front, as most people aren't clear brawling their Mark 7 Golf Rs. And so for me, as much as that was normally a downside, it was actually an upside. But it was more so an upside because the car was meticulously cared for. This car, when I bought it with 100,000 miles, was cleaner than my car that I had bought with like 14,000 miles. I know that's a huge discrepancy, and I'm not saying my car wasn't clean. This car was just so clean that it almost didn't align with how many miles it had on it. And then the other worry was that the clutch survived 100,000 miles, and if it survived 100,000 miles, it should go out any second. But the clutch is bulletproof. Like, it has not given me any problems yet, knock on wood. And the rock chips in the front just kind of gave me that like comfort in knowing I didn't really need to like worry about my car that much. I didn't need to think about clear brawling it, blah, 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 like I have in the past. And so for the price and with the mileage and having a car that I could happily daily, I use this car as a daily driver. I drive it to California all the time. I'd put like 10,000 miles on it probably already, and I've had it like 3 months. I haven't even taken on a fucking road trip yet. It serves the perfect purpose. The manual gearbox keeps me entertained. I am not gonna mod this car as of now, maybe deep in the future, but I do want to put an exhaust on it because it does just feel like a Golf in the time being. The manual gearbox keeps me entertained. It's super comfortable. It's nice. It's far nicer than anything I was thinking about getting, and it just made sense. And I've always had a love for them since my first one. I loved my Golf R. My Golf R was probably the most fun car I owned to drive in the canyons. And I know you guys are thinking, Jordan, you're a crackpot. You owned a GT4, you owned an NSX, an M2. I know, I can't explain it, but there's something about a hatchback, and especially the Golf R. I don't know. When I owned it, I lived in Westlake Village, and I would take it through Malibu canyons all the time, and I absolutely loved it. I loved pushing it to the edge. I didn't feel unsafe, and I didn't have to go 900 miles an hour to enjoy myself. I know I kind of sound like that European England mentality right now, but it is true, and I can definitely side with where people come from. Now, that is how the entire timeline of this channel and my garage has brought me here. Now, I don't say these things obviously to flaunt. I'm trying to be transparent to let you know that in the times when I owned all these cars that people thought were daddy's money, it was really me just trying to make smart investments and run my YouTube channel with a garage. It is really hard to run a YouTube channel when you don't have a garage, an automotive YouTube channel, when you don't have anything to drive around. And a lot of YouTubers know this, and a lot of YouTubers like James Stradman had stretched themselves as far as they could to purchase a car that they could use for content, and it has paid off for a lot of them. For me, when this was always a hobby and a pastime, it just didn't end up paying off because this channel never took off. And whether or not I want to ever make the attempt to make this channel or make the leap to pop this channel off, I don't know. I have this fear again that if I make too much content around cars, I will become numb to them, and cars are one of those things that I battle with back and forth of whether or not I should just leave it as a hobby. Now, I am going to keep posting more content whenever I do get the opportunity to drive cars. I love reviewing cars. If you have access to any cars that you want me to drive, I love doing reviews. I'd love to travel and and go drive new cars or get invited. I would love to go to car events and travel. That would be the dream for me. But right now I'm just too worried about other things. This is going to hold me over. I'm not even going to buy an exhaust. If a company wants to send me one, I'll put one on. But yeah, I hope this inspires people to understand that, like, A, don't wrap your identity and your pride around the things you've purchased in your life, because you might fail at your first business. You might go broke and have to make all your money again, and that's okay, but it will entirely tear you apart if you are so attached to that life and not able to disconnect from these things. Thankfully, I never had to like sell a car last minute, like out of not having enough money. I just kind of knew that I needed to slowly downgrade to adjust to my bank account. And here I am now, back in a Golf R, and oddly enjoying it more than I enjoyed like my NSX, just because it's relative. I'm not saying it in general, NSX Golf R, just because when I owned the NSX, I was more accustomed to those cars, and I was around them more, and when I own this, I'm less accustomed, and it does feel just as fun. That's a stretch. It feels fun.